Scales all criminals awaiting execution in California, death row list. The Chamber of Waiting. They live in the shadow of death, but in California, death rarely comes. Hundreds of the state's most notorious killers sit behind steel doors, waiting for an execution that may never happen. Welcome to the place where justice is trapped in limbo, California's death row. San Quentin State Prison. A concrete fortress on the edge of the San Francisco Bay, part relic, part symbol, and entirely real. Behind its weathered walls lies a world most Californians prefer not to think about, more than 600 men and women sentenced to die by the state, yet still alive. According to the California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation, CDCR, as of 2025, the Golden State houses the largest death row population in America. But what makes it more haunting is this: no one has been executed here since 2006. Not because the crime stopped, but because the system did. The dead man's timeline. The modern story of California's death row begins with a contradiction. In 1972, the California Supreme Court struck down the death penalty in People v. Anderson, calling it cruel and unusual. But voters reinstated it just 4 years later. Since then, the state has executed 13 inmates, while sentencing hundreds more. That means for every one person executed, over 50 remain waiting. Some have waited for more than 3 decades, living, eating, sleeping, and aging under fluorescent lights in 4 by 10-foot cells. They call it the slow death. Each inmate gets 1 hour a day in a small outdoor cage known as the yard. No contact. No privacy. No future, only appeals. One correctional officer once told the Los Angeles Times, "You don't see fear on death row. You see boredom. You see time chewing people alive." The architecture of finality. San Quentin's death row isn't one place, it's a system within a system. There's the adjustment center, the most restrictive unit, housing the most violent or high-risk prisoners. Then there's East Block, where most male death row inmates live, a 5-tiered stack of cells overlooking the bay through iron-grated windows. Every sound echoes: the slamming of steel doors, the rhythmic clank of chains, the calls of inmates trading stories through air vents. A former guard, interviewed in a 2021 ABC News special, said, "It's like time stopped in there. You hear the ocean, you smell salt air, but you never see the sky. Every cell tells a story, each inmate, a chapter in California's darkest history." The infamous list. Among the hundreds, a few names have burned into public record, all verified by the California Attorney General's Office and CDCR databases. Scott Peterson, convicted in 2004 for the murder of his wife, Lacey Peterson, and their unborn child. His case remains one of the most media-saturated trials in modern history. Richard Allen Davis. The men who kidnapped and murdered 12-year-old Polly Klaas in 1993. His crime reshaped California's sentencing laws. Ramon Salcido, who killed 7 family members in Sonoma County in 1989. Douglas Clark, one of the Sunset Strip killers, convicted of a string of murders in the 1980s. Wayne Adam Ford, a former truck driver who turned himself into authorities in 1998 after killing 4 women. Each one sentenced by a jury of peers, each one awaiting the same fate that hasn't been carried out in nearly 2 decades. According to court filings and appellate records, over 200 of these inmates have exhausted all appeals and are legally eligible for execution, but the state has no legal method to do it. The last gas chamber was sealed. The lethal injection protocol was struck down by federal courts. And so they wait. The execution chamber. Deep inside San Quentin lies the lethal injection room, a sterile chamber painted sea green, built in 2010 at a cost of over $800,000. It was meant to modernize death. Now, it sits empty, silent, preserved, untouched. Reporters who've toured it describe the eerie calm. A glass window faces a small gallery of chairs, the viewing room for witnesses. Inside, a single gurney stands under soft light. The straps still buckle. The 4 ports still work. But no one has lain there in 19 years. According to state audit reports, it costs over $100 million a year to maintain death row, more than the entire education budget of some counties. And yet, the political battle rages on. Some argue that keeping inmates alive is mercy. Others say it's injustice, a betrayal to victims' families who've waited decades for closure. One mother, speaking to KQED News in 2023, said quietly, "The man who killed my daughter still gets 3 meals a day. I visit a grave." The women of death row. Few know that California also has a female death row, located at the Central California Women's Facility in Chowchilla. As of 2025, only 21 women remain under death sentences in the state. Their names, too, are public record. One of them, Veronica Gonzalez, convicted in 2002 for the torture and murder of her niece, has been awaiting execution longer than the child had lived. Another, Patricia Krenwinkel, a former follower of Charles Manson, once faced execution before her sentence was commuted. Now, she remains a living artifact of one of the most infamous cases in American history. The conditions mirror San Quentin's: isolation, appeals, monotony. But their silence carries a different weight. A correctional officer described it in a report to the Sacramento Bee. "Women on death row don't fight. They just fade." The governor's moratorium. In 2019, Governor Gavin Newsom signed an executive order halting all executions in California. He called it a failure of justice. The move sparked national debate, celebrated by reformists, condemned by victims' rights groups. The gas chamber was sealed. Lethal injection equipment dismantled. Execution protocols shelved indefinitely. Yet, as the Los Angeles Times noted, the death penalty still lives on paper. Prosecutors continue to seek it. Juries continue to hand it down. And judges continue to sign death warrants that lead nowhere. As of 2025, no death sentences have been overturned en masse. They've simply been paused, leaving hundreds of inmates alive, but legally dead. The cost of waiting. The numbers are staggering. Since the 1970s, California has spent over $5 billion on its capital punishment system. Each death penalty case costs taxpayers roughly 10 times more than a life without parole sentence, according to the Legislative Analyst's Office. Yet, for all that money, executions remain frozen. Critics call it symbolic justice. A sentence with no consequence. But inside San Quentin, time itself has become punishment. A 2022 Stanford Criminal Justice Center study found that the average death row inmate spends 20 years awaiting execution. For many, appeals outlast their health. Nearly 100 inmates have died of natural causes or suicide, more than 7 times the number actually executed. That's California's quiet truth. The death chamber kills fewer people than time does. The human question. What does it mean to live under a sentence that's never carried out? Psychologists call it the death of anticipation. A mental limbo where inmates wake up knowing they will die, but never when, or even if. Some find religion. Some study law to appeal their own cases. Others lose themselves completely. A former inmate, speaking anonymously to NPR, said, "You stop fearing death after 10 years. You start fearing the mirror." That's the paradox of California's death row, designed for justice, maintained for politics, endured by men and women who exist in suspended punishment. The public divide. Across the state, opinions remain split. Polls by UC Berkeley show 60% of Californians oppose executions in practice, but nearly 70% support keeping the death penalty on the books. It's not mercy they want, it's the illusion of control. For lawmakers, repealing it is political suicide. For governors, enforcing it is moral risk. And for inmates, it's another day that feels exactly like yesterday. The battle isn't about life or death anymore. It's about permanence, whether justice can exist without finality. The countdown that never starts. Inmates still refer to the green light, the official notice that their execution date has been set. But no green light has flickered in California since 2006. The last man executed was Clarence Ray Allen, aged 76, put to death by lethal injection for a triple murder. He was nearly blind, diabetic, and in a wheelchair. His execution drew international attention, not for his crimes, but for the question it raised. What does justice mean when death itself takes decades? Since then, the gurney has gathered dust. And the list of the condemned keeps growing. The living dead, inside San Quentin's death row today. The world outside keeps moving: elections, protests, technology, headlines. But inside San Quentin's death row, time is a rumor. The walls never change. The air never shifts. And for the men inside, every sunrise feels like a cruel repetition of the last. They call themselves the living dead, people buried alive in steel and procedure. They breathe, they eat, they exist. But they do not live. The anatomy of isolation. Step through East Block and you'll feel it, the hum of fluorescent lights, the echo of steel boots on concrete, and the quiet shuffle of 600 men who know they'll never leave. Each cell measures roughly 4 feet wide and 10 feet long, smaller than the average walk-in closet. Inside, a bunk, a toilet, a narrow slit of light from a barred window facing the bay. Meals come on plastic trays, slid through a metal slot known as the bean hole. Most inmates eat alone. Some talk through the vents, a low-tech communication network that's lasted for decades. Others refuse to speak at all. According to California Department of Corrections reports, most death row inmates spend 23 hours a day locked inside. The only break, a 1-hour recreation period inside a mesh-covered outdoor cage, barely large enough to pace. That's their world, a box within a box. A correctional sergeant told the Los Angeles Times in 2023. We don't control them with weapons anymore. We control them with distance. The voices behind the walls. Behind every cell door is a story that never ends. Inmate Richard Allen Davis, now in his 70s, passes days sketching portraits for charity programs. Scott Peterson, still fighting his conviction, spends hours in the legal library, preparing handwritten motions. Others write letters to strangers, pen pals drawn by morbid curiosity. A KQED report in 2022 described the phenomenon as death row correspondence culture. Every week, hundreds of letters arrive for condemned inmates, some seeking redemption, others entertainment. Prison officials read every line, checking for codes, threats, or escape plans. But what they can't filter out is the loneliness. One unnamed inmate wrote in a letter later published by the Marshall Project. You can forget the sound of your mother's voice, but not the sound of your own heartbeat at night. The code of survival. There are no gangs on death row, at least, not officially. But alliances exist. Friendships form across racial and criminal lines, bound by a shared enemy, time. Veteran inmates mentor newcomers, teaching unwritten rules, when to talk, when to stay silent, which officers to trust. Some barter artwork, poems, or legal advice for cigarettes or favors. Others find religion. A chaplain who has worked at San Quentin for over 2 decades told NPR. They don't fear God here, they negotiate with him. The chapel becomes a sanctuary of paradoxes, convicted killers singing hymns, men who once took lives now praying for peace. But for some, faith isn't enough. They seek control the only way left, through memory. The ritual of the execution room. Even though executions are suspended, the ritual still exists. New correctional officers are trained in the process, just in case the law changes. The chamber remains spotless, lights tested, straps inspected. According to internal CDCR maintenance logs, San Quentin spends thousands every year preserving a room that hasn't been used since 2006. It's less an execution chamber now, more a monument to indecision. Inmates call it the Green Room. They whisper about it in code, not with fear, but with irony. To them, it's proof that the state can build a machine of death but forget how to turn it on. The quiet deaths. For many, the end doesn't come from poison or gas, it comes from time and despair. Between 2006 and 2024, over 100 inmates on California's death row have died of natural causes or suicide, according to official CDCR statistics. Each death is logged, cleaned, and replaced by another arrival. In 2020, when the pandemic swept through San Quentin, at least 29 inmates died in a single outbreak, several of them on death row. It became one of the deadliest prison health crises in California history. A federal inquiry later called it a preventable tragedy. One surviving inmate told the Sacramento Bee. We were sentenced to death by the courts, but COVID got here first. That's the irony of the system, the state stopped killing, but death never stopped visiting. The price of silence. Running death row costs taxpayers more than $100 million annually, to guard inmates who may never be executed. Every appeal, every legal filing, every mental health evaluation adds layers to the cost of indecision. In 2022, Governor Newsom announced that death row would eventually be dismantled, inmates relocated into general population units. He called it transformational rehabilitation. But critics argued it was a quiet burial, an administrative way to erase a moral dilemma without solving it. Victims' families protested outside the Capitol. One father held a photo of his murdered son and said on camera, "You can move the prisoners. You can't move the pain." The debate never ends because neither side wins. Abolishing death row angers those who lost loved ones. Keeping it alive offends those who value mercy. And so the state does what it always does, nothing. Life in limbo. Inside San Quentin, the mood shifts with every rumor. When word spreads about a potential execution resumption, tension spikes, doors slam, tempers flare, old traumas surface. When a governor extends the moratorium, calm returns, but it's hollow. Inmates still mark days on their walls. Still dream of the outside world. Still stare at the same window bars that never open. A retired correctional lieutenant told The Guardian. They're not scared of dying anymore. They're scared of dying unseen. That's what death row truly is, not a punishment, but an erasure. Men fade before they die, and by the time they're gone, no one remembers the trial, the victims, or the outrage. Justice becomes paperwork. And California, for all its laws, keeps hosting the world's longest wake. The future of execution. The question now isn't when California will resume executions. It's whether it ever can. Legal experts from Stanford Law School's death penalty clinic have argued that the infrastructure is beyond repair. Lethal injection drugs are banned by manufacturers. The gas chamber violates federal safety codes. And the state constitution provides no alternative. To resume executions, lawmakers would have to rebuild the entire system from scratch, a political impossibility in a state where the majority now oppose capital punishment. So the condemned remain, living out natural lives under unnatural sentences. The faces of limbo. For those who study the system, California's death row is a sociological experiment, a test of what happens when justice stalls. For the people inside, it's a loop. Every year, new inmates arrive from counties like Los Angeles, Riverside, and Orange, still receiving death sentences despite the moratorium. They enter East Block with fresh fear, greeted by men who've waited decades. The veterans tell them the truth. You're not dying here. You're just disappearing slowly. Inmates age out. Their hair grays, their eyesight fades. Some go blind before their appeals end. Others lose their sanity long before their case is close. The system doesn't kill them. It simply forgets them. The reckoning ahead. As of 2025, California holds over 630 inmates under sentence of death. The largest death row in the Western world, a kingdom of ghosts inside a state that no longer believes in execution. Reformers say the time has come to end it permanently. Abolition bills circulate every few years, always dying in committee. Meanwhile, the condemned continue their routines, counting days, writing letters, waiting for something that will never arrive. For the outside world, San Quentin stands as a monument to contradiction, the place where justice exists only in theory, mercy only in words, and death itself has gone missing. Because the real punishment in California's death row isn't execution. It's endless survival. Disclaimer. This story is a dramatized adaptation inspired by real events. Some names, places, and details have been changed for privacy. All factual content is based on California Department of Corrections and Rehabilitation data, CDCR 2024, Governor's Executive Orders, Stanford Law Death Penalty Clinic findings, and reporting from the Los Angeles Times, KQED, The Guardian, NPR, and the Sacramento Bee. Where uncertainty exists, details are labeled as unconfirmed or according to reports.